next to the bass. Turn up the radio. They're claiming I'm a criminal. But now I wonder how. Some people never know. The enemy could be the Prince Guardian. I'm not a hooligan. I rock the party and clear all the madness. I'm not a racist priest to teach the officers.
Cause they never had this.
Number one, never wanna run about the gun. I wasn't licensed to have one. The minute they see me, fear me. I'm the epitome of public enemy. Use, abuse without clues. I refuse to blow fuse. They even had it on the news.
Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype.
Yes, was the start of my last jam, so here it is again, another death jam. But since I gave you all a little something that I knew you lacked, they still consider me a new jack. All the critics you can hang on my hole the rope, but they hold to the pope and pray it ain't dope. The follower of Farrakhan, don't tell me that you understand until you hear the man. The book of the new school rap game, writers treat me like Coltrane, insane. Yes to them, but to me, I'm a different kind. We're brothers on the same mind, I'm blind, caught in the middle and not surrendering. I don't rhyme for the sake of riddling. So claiming that I'm a smuggler. Some say I never heard of ya. A rap burglar, false media. We don't need it, do we?
It's figures for the feet of you, dig me? Yo, Terminator X, step up on the stand and show these people what time it is, boy. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype.
Don't believe the hype, it's a sequel. As an equal, can I get this through to you? My 98 booming with a stronger funk. All the jealous folks can't stop the dump. Coming from the school of hard knocks. Some perpetrate, they drink Clorox, attack the black because I know they lack exact the cold facts, and still they try to Xerox. The leader of the new school, uncool, never played the fool, just made the rule. Remember, there's a need to get along. Again, I said I was a time bomb. In the daytime, radio scared of me, cause I'm mad. Plus I'm the enemy. They can't come on and play me in prime time, cause I know the time, plus I'm getting mine. I get on the mix late in the night. They know I'm living right, so here goes the mic sight. Before I let it go, don't rush my show. You try to reach and grab and get elbow. Word to her, yo, if you can't swing this, learn the words. You might sing this, just a little bit of the taste of the bass for you. As you get up and dance at the LQ, with some denied defiant, I swing polos. Then they clear the lane, I go solo. The meaning of all the left, the media is the wax. As you believe it's true, it blows me through the roof. Suckers, liars, give me a shovel. Some writers I know what they're devils. From them I say don't believe the hype.
Yo, Chuck, they must be on a pipe, right?
Their pants and pads I snatch cause I've had it. I'm not an addict, fiend, they for static. I see their tape recorder and I grab it.
No, you can't have it back, silly rabbit.
I'm going to my media assassin, Harry Allen. I gotta ask him.
Yo, Harry, you're a writer. Are we that tight?
Don't believe the hype. Now here's what I want you all to do for me.
Don't believe it. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype.
I got flavor and all those things you know.
Yeah, boy, part two from rush the show. Yo, Grip.
Get the green, black, and red in. Gold down, countdown to Armageddon. 88 to 8, the F1s will. Put the left in effect and I still will. Rock the hard jam, treat it like a seminar. Reach the bourgeois and rock the boulevard. Some say I'm negative, but they're not positive. What I got to give?
The media says this.
Red,
Yo,
black,
don't
and
believe
green.
that hype. They got to be
You know
thinking
what I
that hype.
mean?
You know what I'm saying? Yo, the megas got them going up to see cattle turns like the junkie they out of work. Let me tell you all what's up, man. A lot of people on daytime radio scared of us because they too ignorant to understand the lyrics of the truth that we pumping into them slides, that brain cells, that just fun under the wooden skulls they call caps, you know what I'm saying? But the head's supposed to straighten it out quick, fast, in a hurry. Don't worry, flavor vision ain't furry, you know what I'm saying? Yo, Terminator X. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the
All right. That's a good way to start the evening. So that, for those of you who don't know, that band, that's Public Enemy. We had a request last week for old school hip hop, and they're about as OG as you're gonna get, I would say. I was trying to toss it up between some of the suggestions gave were crossed my mind, but I'm still somewhat affiliated. Even though this is my own thing, doing this, it's still linked to Royal Road. So if I start playing NWA or Two Live Crew, I think I'm gonna get a phone call if I did that. So I was thinking Run DMC maybe, but Public Enemy is just great, and actually like this is a great song to start. So for tonight's discussion, so we're going to talk about the circular economy, designing a circular economy, fiction or fact. So whether or not this is something that is exactly that, if this is just like some sort of academic idea, or is this something that's legitimately possible? So skip that one. So for those in 322, I mean, where we're at with that course, and I mean, we've got both 660 and 322 in this, or in whoever else. For 322, we're at integration of imperatives. For those in 660, we've been looking at 322's a course in sustainable development, and it focuses on just bridging the imperatives of social, economic, and environmental concerns. So we've talked extensively about the three different key imperatives as we've structured them or framed them. Social imperatives, so maintaining social cohesion, healthy societies, building and being stewards of social capital. Talked about the economic imperative, which is maintain well-functioning economies that serve the society, generally speaking. And then lastly, the environmental imperative, which is to reduce or eliminate impacts on the environment. So we've obviously dug deep into and unpacked each one of those ideas through the units that we've looked at. And now we're looking at how to integrate these things together. And I think the idea of the circular economy is a good way to try and approach that, because for one, it's practical. Like we can talk in very broad terms about how to do trade-offs and construct policy that's balanced between these things, or we can look at actually like designing something that does something, right? And this is I tend to like to make things practical, at least in this sense. It's my design background. So in the integration of imperatives, how do we balance these imperatives? So how do we manage these trade-offs? There are trade-offs that need to be made. There's always going to be trade-offs between these things, and we can't. But ideally, we can try and minimize those. And I've seen situations in which those trade-offs, there aren't trade-offs. All objectives are met, very well. So how can we do this? How can we manage those trade-offs, or at least analyze them and avoid them if possible? Is there a magic bullet solution to do this, is the question. So the magic bullet is, there isn't one. I don't think there's a really straightforward answer to that question. In fact, there's no easy solution. But we need to aim in the right direction. So if we don't at least chart a path in that direction, we're not going to make any progress whatsoever. So this is what I don't like about defeatist thinking and defeatist policy, where it's like, well, we're never going to, I don't know, whatever, become carbon neutral or keep the temperature at 1.5 degrees or below 2 degrees or whatever, wherever we want to put that kind of temperature setting if we're talking climate change. I mean, that just doesn't, that doesn't do much for me, right? Like, then you might as well just go and forget about everything, in my opinion. Just go and live your life. But we need to aim in some direction, and this is where I think we can at least start. Even the far out, like I know right now in Canada we're having a lot of pushback from the carbon tax from different provinces, and which is not a good thing if we're talking about climate change, because that is one of the most effective and cost-effective ways of dealing with the problem. So we know that we must, as much as possible, reduce our impacts on the environment. And ideally, the real end game here is to decouple economic activity from environmental degradation. So one of the things that I've talked about, and I said about this blog post that I recently published, was we need to mainstream biodiversity and ecosystems into decision making. So we need to factor in the environment into governance decision making. We'll talk about land use planning or so forth. And then also into business, into how we make corporate decisions about what we do. And California, they met targets and had economic growth. There you go. Well, and same with BC. BC's carbon tax has been quite a success, and it's been revenue neutral. So, I mean, the pushback from guys like Doug Ford, and it's understandable because their base is not in favor of these kind of things. But you know, we have to have some rational arguments about these things, and rational. I mean, say arguments. I mean points that need to be made, and if and look at what has worked. You know, what are the case studies that have worked? Then maybe one could counter argue that, saying, well, that's California, and the economy is quite a bit different because, you know, maybe they have less energy intensive industries. I don't know. I haven't looked at it, but nonetheless, I think the evidence is pretty strong in favor of it. So, what's the magic bullet? Well, environmental management tools. One is better than advancing climate change. Yeah, there we go. So this gets to what we're working on in 660, which is environmental management tools, right? This isn't actually. It's funny that, you know, I'll go to these things like this, the Substance SBI meetings last couple weeks. You know, I didn't hear the word environmental management tools at that conference at all. Like, nor did I hear like any reference to ISO or EMS, environmental management systems, any of that kind of stuff. Zero. And it's unfortunate because, I mean, most of those people are policy people. You know, they've never put in an EMS. Not everybody, but a lot of them have never done an environmental management system. In fact, they probably won't even know what it is. A lot of them. There's some that do that, but they're by far the minority. But the ironic, I guess, part of that is they're about the closest thing to a magic bullet for this problem that I know of, right? Environmental management tools that are practical means by which we can attempt to realize sustainable development. That's what they are. They're varied and depends on their application, but they ground our discussion in things that we do. So they're varied, as we've seen so far in 660. An EMS, so like being ISO 14000 compliant or doing a light EMS. EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment, is an environmental management tool for a project. CEA, Cumulative Effects Assessment, we haven't looked too much at that in our course, but it's a widely used tool when looking at the aggregated effects of different projects in an area to see, okay, what do they accumulate to have in terms of an impact. SEA, Strategic Environmental Assessment. How do we look at the impacts of policy, programs, or plans, or either programmatically along an industry or look at a region. And sustainability assessments, another example of a EM tool that can be used to fulfill this objective. So LCA, life cycle assessment, which what we're looking at in this particular unit, is an interesting tool in light of this discussion because it has direct and obvious implications for a circular economy. Because what it does, an LCA allows us to look at a product and then trace its life through from the creation of that product all the way through to its end of use. That's its life cycle. I mean, that's what a life cycle assessment is, and looking at all that kind of stretch of phase of value chain, if you want to call it that, and to look at all the energy and materials that go into it and the impacts that are realized for that product along that life cycle is you know, it's a way it really speaks to the idea of a circular economy. So, but you do that for a product, right? I could do that for, say, this mouse, like my mouse for the computer, or for the laptop, or for, you know, a bottle of beer, whatever, you know. But the question I have then is, what if we looked at our whole economy this way? So what if we looked at the way our whole economy works from like an LCA standpoint, and then started to kind of figure out how that might fit with the circular economy? So what is a circular economy? What's the idea? Is this a new idea? Not really a new idea. It's been around for a bit. I can't trace it specifically, but I'd say probably, I mean, in the 80s, I'd say. People were talking about this. I mean, you could go way back before this. I'm sure, I don't know. I'm sure Leonardo da Vinci and Renaissance thinkers were having thoughts about this as well. But it really kind of as a practical tool set, I'd say in the 80s, natural step started to come, that kind of thing. So the linear economy is defined as making stuff, using it, and disposing of it. That's our economy right now for the most part. Yes, we have recycling and so forth, but generally speaking, stuff's made, stuff's used, and stuff's disposed of, and yeah, we have some bit of recycling. However, a circular economy has these different phases of it. So we have the design and manufacturing, so creation of products. We have the retailer, which is then taking those products to market. We have then the consumer and household who actually consume and take up those products. And then we have reuse and repair and recycle. So exactly that. We can continue to reuse whatever, like bottles, for instance, or jars or whatever. Repair it if it's something that is, not broken down. Or we could recycle it. We can then put it back into the economy, basically. And we have the recycling sector, which is, the part of a circular economy which finds a use for waste materials. Some of the principles of the circular economy are design out waste and pollution. So if we're coming up with a new product, in the design of it, we don't want waste and we don't want pollution. That's a rule, right? Keep products and materials in use. So once they get into the economy, into the households and in the consumer space, keep them being used as much as possible. So don't encourage consumption. Don't encourage wasteful consumption. If you say, for instance, Patagonia, I would say they kind of, I don't know if they've articulated it, but they certainly, what they do speaks to a circular economy. They want you to use your products as long as you can. They're not they're not designing obsolescence into their jackets and their pants and so forth. And then lastly here, regenerate natural systems. So that's a principle from the MacArthur Foundation. And we'll look at their model first. So this is from the UK RAP, which is a part of their government, I believe, in the UK, which is looking at trying to realize the circular economy. Okay, so this is a model that's a little more complicated. This is Ellen MacArthur Foundations. So they, it's kind of hard to see, but basically what they have here, what they've added to this kind of classic circular economy is regeneration. So up in the principle 1, it says, oh my gosh, I don't think I can even read that. Just a second, I'm going to pull it up on my system here so I can read that out. 1 second. Sorry about that. It was a little smaller than I thought. When I put stuff on here, it gets a little smaller than on my screen, so I should make that text bigger. There we go. Principle 1 in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation approach is preserve and enhance natural capital by controlling finite stocks and balancing renewable resource flows. So they're looking at then natural capital, which we've talked about, I believe, in both courses, at least in the SD lectures too. Natural capital is basically our bank of natural material that we have use of, right? So we draw on natural capital in order to make things. So we draw on, say, trees in order to build wood houses. that kind of thing. So we're depleting the supply of natural capital if it's not regenerative natural capital, like trees, you could say, or it's a renewable resource. Preserve and enhance natural capital by controlling finite stocks. So finite stock would be minerals, so for instance, and balancing renewable resource flows, right? So balancing the renewable resource, so balancing the flow of, say, fish, trees. Those would be the renewable source of resources. That's principle number one. Principle number two. So principle number two, so you can see in this diagram where that's speaking to, the top is about drawing on natural capital, right? So you have like a wellhead there, you have electricity, right? So we want to, as much as possible in the first part there, is minimize our draw on natural capital, and then control the flow of natural resources that are renewable, so like fish, forests, for instance, into our productive system. So principle number two here in this like middle bar there is our productive system. So this one here is more like the previous, like this section 2 here is more like this. Like this is all within section 2. Now why MacArthur has added this, made a little more sophisticated model, is because they've added regenerative thinking into their circular economy model. They want the economy to be regenerative to natural capital. Therefore, they have that kind of that balance, the stock flow from natural capital into this kind of productive economy. So in section 2, principle number 2, optimize resource yields by circulating products, components, and materials in use at the highest utility at all times in both technical and biological cycles. So basically, this means optimize the yields by circulating products, right? So ensure that we're getting the most out of the capital that we're using. And so if, I'll send a link to this this site, and you can take a closer look at what the different parameters are in principle 2. But I mean, essentially, it's like the previous slide I showed you. And then principle 3 is foster system effectiveness by revealing and designing out negative externalities. So negative externalities are the things like, say, pollution, like waste pollution, because it's a product of our economic activity that is not beneficial to the environment. Right. So if we're saying, say for instance, like we're making stuff, making cars, and then we're polluting polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons to water, right? That's then going to be a carcinogen in the water supply under under certain concentrations, and that then is it's a negative externality. So principle 3 is look at designing out those negative externalities, so not having those kind of negative loads on the environment. All right, so sounds straightforward, right? So EM tools in the circular economy. Just a sec. Sean reminded me of a presidential candidate in Peru promising to half the price of the gas cylinders, but they're used for kitchen stoves. Okay. I think you're talking about the former Peruvian, I think it's Peru. He also, I think it's the same guy, he wanted to revise the Constitution to give nature rights. Pachamama, they call it nature. And Sakwa, I forget the name they use, but it's an indigenous name. It didn't work out well, actually, because they were expecting to get like financial support from the international community to not develop their oil resources, and therefore they get cornered off and say that's a no-go zone because nature has rights constitutionally now. However, because we're not developing our oil resources, we're not making money, so we want, you know, 150 million bucks or whatever it was from, or more, $1 billion, I presume, from the international community such that we can sustain our economy. Well, guess what? They didn't get the cash. So what happened? They went and started oil production. That's what happened. If we look at the circular economy model, we can start to see the applicability of EM tools. So if we look at that model, either one, right? Look at the center part of the previous model or the other, the RAP model. So if you look at here, this one in here, you have manufacturers, service providers, parts manufacturers, like all of those like contain systems of production where we need to slide in EM tools. So like an LCA is an obvious one. That's the one that I would think would be the most obvious thing to use, just because it speaks to like the life cycle of a product. However, the other ones do kind of make sense as well. So in EIA, so when planning a project, we can build circular economy concepts into the plan before the ground is broken. So imagine if we made it law in the CEAA 2012, so in the legislation, to say that principles of the circular economy must be present in the proponent's plan for this project, and then they'd have to articulate that in the EIA document. That'd be great. I mean, that'd start the ball rolling, I think. Start people thinking about it. SEA. We can look at the application of circular economy principles in policies, plans, and programs, either by sector or regional. So an SEA is a strategic environmental assessment, and it's done, generally speaking, on principles or policies or plans. So it's like looking at, say, we could look at the SEA of, I don't know, establishing an agricultural land reserve, right? Or we can look at the SEA of the agricultural industry in Quebec. That would be look at across that sector of those policies to see what the environmental impacts are. And in circular economy, again, come and say, well, we want to promote the idea of the circular economy in the Canadian manufacturing sector, right? So you did an SEA for that sector, you'd build that into it. So that's how it would most likely work. CEA, cumulative effects assessment. Again, big issue, CEA, talk about a lot. So CEA, cumulative effects assessment is when you have multiple projects that aggregated impacts. So let's say you have 5 mines in one geographic area. You'd want to look at the cumulative effects of all those actions of those different operations in that area to see if if there's a problem. But again, circular economy could fit into the CEA methodology to say, well, even with these cumulative effects, assessing them, we want to make sure that we can control these impacts through circular economy principles. And then EMS, the environmental management system, is a way to do that as well, because as you know, the EMS is the way of promoting planning, doing, and checking in organizations to help manage their environmental emissions, right, and social impacts. So you could take the circular economy model and put it into an EMS, which is not much different from any organization that's doing the natural step. Say they've got an EMS and they've decided to do the natural step procedure and have that as a method. They would be then really doing the circular economy in their own organization. So EM tools relate to this whole idea, like very, very, very profoundly, actually. But I'm still in Montreal, so I can speak bad English and say, but how are we going to do this, right? How are we going to do this? Well, I think design thinking. I mean, this is what I work in, so I mean, this is just kind of the way I think about this stuff. But I think that's really where I put my money. My money goes in design thinking. Like, we need to really seriously consider the existing systems that we have in place, what's working, what's not, and then find a way to redesign it, right? So if we start to look at all production processes in society and then think of the life cycle and also impacts on natural capital, like I explained to you before, the draw on natural capital to produce stuff, we can start from a good base. We then look at, okay, here's our system. This is our economy. We're taking all this stuff out of nature, like here's us, and then we have these kind of a system boundary, and then going into our economy, our energy flows, material flows, so forth and so on. So that's how we want to frame the problem first. But then once we have that model in place, we say, does LCA account for carbon footprint? No, you can do carbon footprint for LCA. So you can calculate, I've done that, you can calculate the greenhouse gas emissions at each stage of production of something. Like, say, if you wanted to do the LCA of, I don't know, a bottle of Coke, you could do that. You could analyze the greenhouse gas emissions that go into the creation and use of that product all the way through from conception through to waste. In fact, one of the companies that we're pitching or discussing, working with right now, we're looking at doing something like that for their products. So if we have design, we look at the production process and we then have an understanding of what that system is, like how that stuff is created. We then put conditions in place, right? So given we have this kind of production cycle, we say, okay, here are the conditions. We want like 0 carbon, for instance. That could be one condition. This needs to be net 0 carbon emissions. That could be one of the things. We could also look at net 0 impact on biodiversity. That's a rule. We want to have net 0 impact on biodiversity. So I call those things design constraints, because you're looking at like redesigning this thing. Say, okay, well, we know that there needs to be net 0 carbon emissions. So either we're like not emitting any greenhouse gas emissions, or we're somehow, offsetting them through, I don't know, planting trees, or some sort of like, it needs to come down to net 0. Same thing for biodiversity, and then it would be the same thing for water and other environmental services. Now, if we have then a set of design constraints and we have our system that we've analyzed and kind of broken it out, we can then be creative, right? We can start to use our creativity, which is, one of the saving graces of humanity is the fact that we're very, very creative. And I think that was E.O. Wilson that said that saving grace of humanity in light of where we're going with the health of the planet is that we are very creative. So can it be regenerative though? That's another one. This is stuff that I'm very curious about. Can we make a regenerative circular economy model? Well, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation thinks that we can. I think we can. I'm not sure how we can yet though, but I think it's possible, right? It's something I'm kind of just mulling around on projects now and working and stuff. Say, well, how can we potentially make this regenerative, So when we look at SDGs, such as achieving land degradation neutrality by 2030, the circular economy becomes much more necessary. So this is one of the Sustainable Development Goals. I forget which number it is, 15 maybe, something like that. I forget which one. It is a goal. So to reach land degradation neutrality by 2030, that means that there's no net loss of land, period. So all of the deforestation is either offset or offset by some sort of other action, like or just stopped altogether, right? Has it happened though? Is it possible? Yes. Are there frameworks in place? Yes. Has this started to happen? There've been some examples of it, but I haven't seen a ton of it, right? Like not super, I don't know, not blowing me away. Only one really kind of blows me away on this particular issue, which is a circular economy in an EM tool framework, and that's interface carpets. Anybody familiar with interface carpets? Yes or no? No one? No. Wow. Okay. No. Good. Then you're going to get, even if you, now that you know about interface carpets, this is worth your time. Sean, you know about interface carpets. Yeah. So interface carpets, this is where I date myself, because like, when I started studying this stuff a long time ago, interface carpets was like the hero. Now they're old news, kind of like they've been at it for a while. So interface carpets it's a carpet company that was privately held by the CEO and owner and founder was a guy named Ray Anderson. He's from Atlanta, Georgia. He's a Southern gentleman. He's now deceased. He died, I think, about 5 years ago, or maybe 4, something like that. But and carpet's a nasty business, right? So carpet, like your standard carpet, has a lot of like hydrocarbon-based and chemical-based constituents that go into it. There's a lot of off-gassing that has happened in the past. I mean, they've addressed that now. But it's a really resource-intensive and polluting industry if you look at it just on its basics. But Ray Anderson looked at that and said, look, this is my business, and he was hunting, I believe, or he was out in the woods, in the swamp or something like that, and had this epiphany where he saw that there should be no net impact on nature. He wanted to reduce their impact on nature dramatically. And so he had this epiphany and then went back to his staff and said, look, this is what I want to do. I don't want to have an impact on nature. And then they came up with this idea of Mount Sustainability, which was like a journey to the top, and then reassessed their whole production of their business. So they then started basically renting carpet in a way. They sold you the carpet, but they took they would take it once you're done with it, like say 10 years after you had purchased it and installed it and all that kind of stuff, and you're done with it. You say, look, we're done. We want more carpet or whatever, or change things. They will go and they will take it, and they'll take it back and they'll repurpose it. So they really embrace the circular economy and what they're doing. But then they also look at all their impacts. So they've had very aggressive targets on climate change and water use and so forth and so on. So they made this YouTube video here tells about his thoughts on circular economy. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that when you get a chance. I believe you can. We'll just copy paste that from either now for your browser or do it at a later date. So, but what happened, right? So it's all fine and dandy to be like a hero. He says, has a private company and a sizable one too. And said, well, I want to, be green, and then of course the UN loves you, and David Suzuki Foundation loves you, and you have all these kind of advocacy-based friends. But what does it really mean for the business, right? So they started doing this like well before the last recession, and he had, when I saw him speak, he had data on how they were doing, and so this had a positive effect on their business. They were more marketable, they were more profitable, they were more resilient to economic shocks, right? So they weren't as kind of, impacted by, say, a recession or increase in price of oil and so forth and so on. So they did this by looking at, they made this transition by looking at the life cycle of their products, and then they set ambitious goals for key parameters. So they didn't just do a circular economy thing, saying, okay, we're going to recycle everything, repurpose things, and get all their scientists on it, and so forth and so on. They did that, but they also set targets. They said, we want to, reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by this much, and then they worked towards it. So my feeling is I've seen, a few different groups, a number of them doing this stuff. I would think that it's important to have a system in place. So some sort of, like in this case, some sort of circular economy model or whatever, or an EMS even, but then set really aggressive targets, right? Or set targets that maybe not super aggressive, but they're doable, but they're going to require some effort and they're going to have an impact, right? Because without that, like a system and then really strong goals, you're not going to get anywhere. And Interface Carpets did that, and they scored very well on their report card. But how can this be upscaled? So that's one company doing that, largely because the CEO believed in it and they just committed to it. And if it's his company, then either it's their way or the highway. But how can this be upscaled? So I want to know your thoughts on this, because I don't have an answer to this necessarily. It's something that I'm looking at. But like, where do we start? What do we look at? Where would you start? What do we do? What actions would we put in place? And what do we need in order to do it? So those are the three questions. So what are your thoughts? Where would you start? Anybody? It needs to be expanded to include multiple businesses. Yes, exactly. So how might we do that, though? A larger circle, yeah, for sure. What will be a logical step? I can think of one way based on what you've said. I would say stop shopping once waste was in. Yeah, sure. I think an interesting thing to do would be, let's say we're dealing with carpet here, but you could say, yeah, well, a carbon tax is it's a constraint that's going to push consumption. It's going to affect consumption, and that's going to be a good thing. But in this, if we want a circular economy approach, and we've got, say, one carpet company that's doing it and they're still profitable, I would go to like the local or the regional carpet business association, right? Or let's say mining, right? Say we want to do circular economy in mining. Then, and one of the groups is successful, like I don't know, so it's tech, right? And it could be, that wouldn't surprise me if they had good circular economy stuff going. So we then have an example of something that works, that's profitable for a business and wins for society. Talk to the industry association. I think that might be, you then get them saying, look, why don't we promote a circular economy in this industry, in our industry? And these folks are very industry focused because it's their lifeblood, right? So I would start with that and then start to and then go. So that's taking care of like businesses. We have like in this company and then several companies within an industry perhaps. I think celebrating the heroes in this, so celebrating the Ray Andersons of the world, I think is an important thing to do. But I also think we need to think about households as well, right? So we need to think about society and whether people are even understanding this, right? It would be good to know how receptive people are, your average person, to this kind of idea, as opposed to saying, that's crazy academic stuff, or that's going to cost us money, so therefore we can't do it. I just don't think that's the right way to kind of even start this discussion with someone. So looking at an example and then seeing how it could be implemented across sectors, but then also looking at educating people, so your consumers out there in the world and their households, to say, okay, well, let's start to think about our lives as a circular economy type of approach, right? And what we choose to use and buy and so forth should fit with that, right? I think they do, London Drugs. London Drugs is pretty progressive on this issue, I found. I've seen some literature, or at least some web stuff on what they're doing, and it's pretty impressive. Anybody else have any ideas about how? Yes, doesn't London Drugs close the extended producer program? I don't know specifically what you mean with extended producer program, but I'm trying to get at companies like a London Drugs that would then promote circular economy approach to all the stuff that they sell. So they, for instance, what they might do then is, let's say London Drugs is buying, I don't know, deodorant, right? Say purchase a lot of deodorant and then sell it. They do. That's one of the things. So they could then look at their suppliers and say, look, do you like? They'll have Menon, they'll have, I don't know, whatever, Old Spice and blah blah blah, all the companies that they deal with. They could apply pressure on their supply chain and say, hey, do you take a circular economy approach, right? Are you taking full custody of your products in the end of life? Are you factoring in what goes into your products from their inception? And then if not, say, well, I think you need to do that. Walmart did that. So Walmart did that with their supply chain, and the beauty of Walmart is they've mastered supply chain economics, and they then are able to deliver products at bulk to the consumers at low prices or effective prices. And that's Walmart has been successful for that reason. But they also have then implemented pretty heavy duty environmental parameters into that as well to meet their goals. I think we need to change our consumption habits and economy focus on services. Yes. So this is another part of this, which is the structure of the economy itself. So that's the households, right? So that then comes into consumer behavior, saying, okay, well, what do I need? And yeah, we're going to buy stuff. I buy stuff. It's not like I'm a monk or something like that, but I buy stuff to last. That's my thing. I'll go buy a leather jacket or whatever it is, and it's going to last a while. But the public needs to think in these terms. I mean, they need to know what the circular economy is and their role in it, because they're a big part of that, right? If you look at the framework for first one, the WRAP framework, here you have consumers and households are right down in the bottom right. That's the green arrow. So they're a part of that, right? Probably certain. Okay, they do have a light version of this by allowing waste return of certain products. Yeah. So and I've seen things from London Drugs that are quite inspiring. They're doing some things that are proposing to do things, wanting to do certain things that are pretty impressive. Right? So we've got transformation of industry. We've got attuned the consumers, so households and consumers, into this way of thinking about stuff. And then I think we also need to think about policy, right? Because the government or the companies will do their thing, the society will do their things, but we also need, government to encourage this kind of thinking as well. I think that's part of the solution is getting the government to get on board with this. Product lifecycle management in place, sure. Like, well, for one, EIA, say for any project that's being done, there needs to be a life cycle, like a circular economy approach demonstrated in the EIA, right? Wow, that will, every project then that goes into EIA has to have that, even if it's just, lightly done. At least it's then mandated to be addressed within every project that's going through an environmental impact assessment. Right? So there's a lot of levers that the government has that the consumers don't have, and that industry has to comply with. So I think that might be another way of looking at this as well. But like EMSs and environmental management tools are the ways of operationalizing this. That's what they are. So we've got to think creatively about how to apply these approaches to industry. All right. So I don't have much more to say on that tonight. I've left it quite general, but I want you to start about that in in 660 in your assignments and in the readings and the examples that you've chosen. Think about how they may fit into for the discussion, how they fit into a circular economy framework, and start to think about this in the EM tools framework. And then 322, think about this in more, I would say, more general and broad terms. And let's just say if we're doing a new sustainable development policy for Canada or a country, name and whatever, St. Lucia, right? Stuff I'm working with. Think about how this idea of a circular economy can then be used to help manage the challenges of trade-offs between different imperatives. Like, for instance, if it were completely done beautifully, like we had a circular economy, ideal circular economy implemented, maybe we wouldn't have those trade-offs because they would be taken care of in the design of the economy. Like, we wouldn't have environmental degradation at the cost of producing these TVs or something like that. Product life cycle management in place, yeah. All right, so that's that's my 2 bits for this evening. We're pushing an hour now, but does anybody have any questions about this? Does it make sense, the idea of it? Yeah. Is this a new thing for you? Have you heard of this before? It's a new thing. Yeah. So it's not a carbon could be an issue with transport. Yeah, I mean, you have to look at that. That's the thing. This is look at this in another course. Yeah, I mean, this is not a new idea, but making it happen is new, and it's quite interesting. It's a neat idea. Like, it's a neat idea. I mean, like if I look at these 2 models I've shown you, the RAP one makes a little more sense to me because it's simplistic. As we start to broaden, you're going to lose people when we get in, like the MacArthur Foundation model. Like, yeah, I'm all in for regenerative economies, right? I'm all in for accounting for natural capital and making sure it's a net surplus as opposed to a deficit. Fine. But, I go and tomorrow I could walk downtown Montreal and, go and pop into a CEO's office and, whatever. I mean, go to this, talk to the head of the Bank of Montreal and say, you need to do this. They'd look at me and they'd be like, okay, fine, you need to go leave my office, right? or something like that. There's a good example of rethinking and sort of used in Cradle to Cradle. Yeah, Cradle to Cradle, that's McDonough's book. So McDonough's, like, he's, William McDonough's a big, it's a big thinker in this space and has been for a long time. He's like one of the luminaries. Some years ago, it was an idea. I really impressed on us. Yeah, I mean, this isn't a concept like 10, 15 years ago, whereas it's reality now. Like Interface Carpet, there was, I would say the workforce really did it effectively. They did it profitably. There was other people that were doing it or trying it, but they made it happen, and they showed that through the downturn, the recession in 2009 or whatever it was, the collapse, they were profitable during that time. Less than they normally were, but they didn't go out of business. They're a resilient organization. They were anyway. So I think it has merit, the idea, and I think it's the way forward. So that's the conceptual idea, and the way of implementing this through applying environmental management tools. That's a part of it. So it's fortunately for 660, that's the stuff that you're working on, and then 322. You know, think about that and then kind of consider how it can help manage the trade-offs between the imperatives. Yes, circular economy and biomimicry are keys for a sustainable economy. Absolutely. Biomimetics and biomimicry is a design paradigm that is powerful and hopefully scalable. There are some examples that have been scalable, but not widely used. And we need to see more of it. Right? We need to look at book and stuff that's worth a read. Cradle to Cradle is the book you should read. Yeah, on this. It's the book on designing, designing life cycle assessment and design. Cradle to Cradle design is what McDonough. So here, just 1 second. William. His YouTube lecture is good. He's got one on YouTube. Sec. And so here's their website. Take a look at this. They've actually got like a business around this thing. That's what you got to look at. And then I think you also should look at design is optimism. It's got a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to go. He has his own YouTube. He too has a YouTube channel. I have YouTube channels now, so I feel like a big shot. There we go. Yeah. So go to his channel and take a look at the stuff that he's doing, because he's awesome. Oops. So I'm sorry. If you just Google McDonough on look at that stuff. You can see, yeah, Cradle to Cradle, the circular economy, the new language of carbon. So this one I just put through is about carbons. They're looking at carbon life cycle through a product life cycle. We're considering carbon. So how much greenhouse gases goes into the creation of a product through conception all the way through to creation, use, and end of use. I've actually pitched this for this company to look at. In fact, even I'm trying to encourage them to build into their sustainability program consumer responsibility, right? To build this company out as kind of looking at not only their own carbon footprint, which I've done, but like looking at scope 3 emissions of their consumers, right? Which is scope 3 is a scope 3 emission is one that you don't have management control over. So I have proposed to them to include in their scope 3 emissions the greenhouse gas emissions of their consumer. Like, let's just say it's like on the way to the amount of energy they've used in order to consume their product, purchase it, and so forth. And the idea there, what I'm thinking, or my proposal is to extend their responsibility somewhat, not directly, but to help then, they can then encourage their consumers, because they're their loyal customers, to minimize their greenhouse gas emissions through whatever means necessary in the process of kind of consuming their product. That's the idea. It's an extension of responsibility. Much like Levi's has done that for water use. They encourage people not to wash their jeans as much as people typically have, and they've done that because they want to see less water used in California. So that's their approach. Any other questions? I think this is happening though, and I see it going forward. And I think the exciting part is going to be on the regenerative side of things. Quick read, will solve the climate problem. Okay, it's a good contribution. Thanks, Brian. Take a look at that. I mean, I'm always a little hesitant about capitalism is going to solve this and so forth, but I believe in it. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm sold on it. I believe in the idea, but we also need regulations are very important in that discussion as well. Regulations help us put the goalposts in place. That's the beauty of them, is they give us something to aim for. And when you don't have them, then industry doesn't know which way to which direction to move in. I've literally had that discussion with energy companies, saying, look, they haven't come up with the guidelines, or they haven't come up with the goals and targets, so we're not going to do anything until we see that. That's the feedback that I had from the downstream folks that I used to work with. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, it has to be profitable. That's the thing, I think. Uh, I want to see case studies that are bankable, viable businesses. So the whole idea of the bankable project, a bankable project is like, say, for the carbon stuff, right now, if you want to do an LDN project, land degradation neutrality, and there's funding for that through Mirova and other investment firms they have a large amount of capital to put towards land restoration and land degradation neutrality projects. You will not get financed through that program. This is the UNCCD, UN Convention for Combating Desertification, and then the operational part of that is the global mechanism, it's called. And they've got large amounts of investment for land degradation projects that are going to help realize land degradation neutrality. But one key thing there is they state right up front, it has to be a bankable project. So a bankable project is one that's economically feasible. They will then invest in it and give you money to do this LDN, whatever it is, planting jatropha or something like this, and having a business come out of it. But it has to be, there has to be some sort of, sustainability from an economic standpoint, such that they can get a return on that investment. Or the loan, it could be a concessional loan, soft loan. All right. More questions? There are no more. I'm optimistic. I see it as a massive, massive opportunity for those that are willing and brave enough to take it on. You folks have the skills and the training now to take this on. Okay, I'm closing it off, but as we close, we will listen to
But what occurred was the language. So sad. Carbon negative is a positive. That means carbon itself.
who's this? Sir Jones. Tom Jones, yeah. That was a request from Ben, I believe. There you go.
You wanna impress me? You can't be too flirty, mama.
It's a cover,
Know how to
but
undress
nonetheless, it's a good cover.
Let me be your fantasy, and maybe you could be mine.
You're gonna make me a Tom Jones fan.
You
Okay.
just leave it all up to me.
The guy's got style. I'll tell you that.
Time.
This is Prince. That's Tom Jones covering Prince.
To be my girl, you don't have to be good to rule my world. Ain't no particular sign I'm gonna back up with. I just want your extra time and your kid. Think I better dance now.
All right, folks. I hope it was interesting. And think about making this stuff happen in your own sphere of influence and benefiting from it. You need to listen to more music. We'll play some Colombian music next time. Play some, what is the Colombian? All right, take it easy, folks. Have a good night.